Just give me 1 second while I get set up here. Great. Thank you very much, Matthew. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever the case may be. Just give me 1 second. Cinematography, thank you very much. Whoops, excuse me. And I will make a video. Excuse me here. Just getting my water ready. So, okay. If the sound is giving you issues, please let me know. I hope the sound is okay. But just give me 1 more minute and then we'll get underway here. And in the meantime, just I hope all of you are doing very well today. And we're going to talk about this film Picnic at Hanging Rock. So it's very exciting. Very exciting. Okay, so sorry about this. Just trying a little bit of a different setup today. Let's see. Sound is good. Thank you very much. Okay. So just give me 1 more second here. All right. Oh, looks like we have, yes, a group is forming. So this is great. So let's see. Why don't we just give it another maybe a minute or so, and then we'll get going. So just in the meantime, my friends, it's nice to see you, and thank you very much for joining today, which is the second of these live stream film club chats about the film Picnic at Hanging Rock. So this is really exciting for me to be able to talk live with you in real time about this very interesting film. And so what I want to do is just let you know that the live stream live chat is available to you to talk with each other about the film. And in the meantime, I will be trying to talk to you about certain topics that I thought might be interesting to talk about with respect to this film. But please feel free to, you can address my specific questions or comments, or you can just talk amongst yourselves about Picnic at Hanging Rock. That's perfectly fine. Absolutely fine. And I also want to say that I think Picnic at Hanging Rock is a very peculiar film. It's a film that has, I think, a lot of I think I'll talk about this. I feel like it's a film that has a mix of very different genres. It's like a kind of a mystery film. It's maybe a gothic romance film. It's like a horror film. I think in some ways it feels like a giallo film, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I think there are many different parts to it, and so for me anyway, there's many parts of it that I find a little bit confusing or mysterious, and so I always wanted to share my thoughts about this and hear what others had to say about what certain things meant and what certain characters did that wasn't necessarily explained explicitly within the film itself. And so I'm looking forward to this very much. Oh, Melinda, thank you very much for your super chat. Thank you. And it's totally not necessary, but thank you very much all the same. You did the same thing last time, and so I'm very grateful. Melinda, I hope you're well. And so what I'm going to do is I'll try to address the live stream chat as best as I can. But if I miss your comment along the way, please, I apologize. You can always send me the comment again, and I'll try to address it in the video. And excuse me here. Also, Cinebrew SI, thank you very much. Thank you. It's very kind of you. Thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. What was I saying? So, oh yes, so, and I'll try to address all of your comments as best as I can, but if I miss them, please feel free to post the comment afterwards. This will be a video afterwards, and so I'll do my best to address any picnic at Hanging Rock related comment to the best of my ability. Also, just as a gentle reminder, please let's keep the conversation limited to discussions of this film. If I see any talk about other films, unrelated discussion, I'm just going to ignore it. So, and if you see that as well, just please do the same. Just ignore any conversation like that, and just you can talk amongst yourselves about this discussion about the film Picnic at Hanging Rock. So. Okay, my friends, let's just get underway here about this very interesting film, Picnic at Hanging Rock. Now, I'm assuming all of you have seen it because I will be talking about spoilers, and I know people will be talking in the live chat about spoilers, and so I just want to say that there are a lot of mystery elements to this film. There's a lot of things that I think are worth savoring, and so it would be a shame if this film were spoiled by this live chat. And so I urge you, anyone out there, if you haven't seen the film yet, please do not watch this. Please watch the film first, and then after you've seen the film, you can always come back to this chat, or you can always come back to this this video once it's uploaded. So that's because, as many of you know who've seen the film, it's filled with many mysteries, and I think if it were spoiled, it would be quite a shame indeed. Okay, let's get to work here. So, 1975. This is a film that's directed by Peter Weir, and the script is by a gentleman whose name is Cliff Green, and the cinematography is by a cinematographer whose name is Russell Boyd. And we have stars here. Rachel Roberts stars as Mrs. Appleyard, and we have Dominic Guard, and we have Helen Morse and Anne Lambert, among others, in this film about the disappearance of these three girls and one teacher. So 4 people during an excursion, a school trip excursion, one day to this place called Hanging Rock, which is in Australia, southern part of Australia. And the film is essentially about how this disappearance affects this particular community, in particular this community of the school, Appleyard College, which is run by Mrs. Appleyard, played very, I would say, with brutal, devastating aplomb by Rachel Roberts. And we'll get to her in a second because there's a lot to say about Mrs. Appleyard, am I right? So that's one thing I want to talk about first, though, is this is a film that I think on its surface feels like it should be a straightforward mystery film, right? Or it's like it should be a straightforward police procedural, because it feels like in the outset it should be about the search for these girls and this teacher, Miss Greta McCraw, right? And the girls that went missing are, there's Marion, there's Irma, and of course there is Miranda. So those are 3 girls. Miranda figures in very prominently in the plot of this film. But it feels like it should be a mystery film, right? It feels like it should be a police procedural film. And it feels like it should be a film that has the setup of a mystery, the disappearance of these women, and the propulsion of the mystery going forward, namely the various clues that are assembled upon the interrogation of the various related parties, plus the plus the extra added search by the young man played by Dominic Garb, Michael, and also his friend, or the house servant who is also his friend, or he's not really a house servant, but he's the servant who's also his friend, who he befriends, Albert, and so there is that search element there, but as you know, the film does not continue down that route. In fact, it almost abandons any hope of being a kind of mystery film and a police procedural film. Halfway, I would say, or maybe a little after that, and it instead focuses, it turns its focus on how the mystery is affecting this community. And I would dare say that this mystery and this event at Hanging Rock has affected each of the characters in a completely unique and different way. And so I would say that by the end, we have all the characters who are in their own particular pockets of emotional turmoil, of confusion, of different individualized and personal kind of crises, and they each therefore deal with it in a different way, in a unique way, which I find very fascinating, so that by the end of the film, all the characters, all the key characters seem to be disparate and separate, and there's no sense of union or connection among any of the characters by the end. There might be some to a certain degree, but I guess my point is that each character is in his or her own special place by the film's end. And so it seems to suggest to me that this is a sort of a narrative play telling us that the mystery of Hanging Rock and the disappearance of these women, by now it would be Marion, Miranda, and Miss Greta McCraw. By this time, it seems to have affected different people in different ways. And so I find that to be an interesting, just a little bit of an interesting way in which the narrative plays out. Just another thing before we get to some comments of yours to get started. This is apparently, or how should I put it? The film seems to be presenting itself as a kind of true story, and the book, the underlying novel by Joan Lindsay, Picnic at Hanging Rock, which if you haven't read, I strongly recommend that you do. It's a very relatively short book, it's about 200 pages, and it goes by very quickly, and it's really excellent. So, but also the Joan Lindsay, while she was alive, apparently also seemed to suggest, or at least the how should I say, the idea emerged that this story was somehow directly based on a true story. Now, you look around and you do a little bit of generalized online Google search research, and I think you can find that, at least as far as I can tell, there is no historical record of this specific event actually happening, at least anything that one can find through generally acceptable or generally accessible resources online. And so if, let's assume, or I always assume, therefore, that this story is not directly based on a true story. In other words, it is the actual events, specific events of this situation are probably not true. And I don't think they're true. That's not to say that Joan Lindsay didn't, I mean, she could have used maybe an event and maybe based that on, base the story around that. If you look at the documentaries that are included here, and in fact there's another documentary included on the second site release, which is, I would say, much longer and much more in depth than the Criterion documentary. But there are two things in the documentaries that I think are very interesting about this aspect. One, Helen Morse, the actress who plays Mademoiselle de Portier, and she's referred to as Mamselle. And she recounts that, according to her understanding, Joan Lindsay apparently dreamt up the story, and immediately upon waking up from her dream, she then proceeded to write down, or started to write down, the novel. And so that suggests, right, to me, without going into further detail, but it's a suggestion, of course, that perhaps this was something that was directly Joan Lindsay's own, the product of her imagination, right? Which is very interesting. But on the contrary, there is a story that's given by Anne Lambert, who plays Miranda. Now, she's referred to in the documentary as Anne Louise Lambert, and she recounts how during the shooting of the film, when she first met the author, Joan Lindsay, Joan Lindsay embraced her and hugged her and whispered something in her ear. And I don't remember the exact phrase, but I'm going to paraphrase it. It was something like, I missed you. Oh, Miranda, I missed you. And so this was to suggest, I think, that Joan Lindsay seemed to approach the actors on the set as though they were the actual characters in her story, Picnic at Hanging Rock. So that's probably suggestive of that kind of aspect of Joan Lindsay's character. But another thing I think it sort of implicitly suggests is that, and I think Anne Lambert gets to this, is that Joan Lindsay seems to have perhaps maybe she seems to be looking at the story as though these are real people. And she looked at Anne Lambert as Miranda and embraced her and talked to her as though she was an actual person. And so that could have meant that perhaps Miranda was based on someone that Joan Lindsay knew. And I think it's well documented that Joan Lindsay, when she was growing up, she actually went to a school that for all intents and purposes, was perhaps a place that was not dissimilar to the Appleyard College that we know in the film. And so that's to say that perhaps we have a story here that is based on certain memories or ideas of her childhood. Who knows? It might have been some story of folklore. Who knows? But in any event, I would say that we are dealing with a story here that purports to be a true story with certain elements. We have the introductory. Well, I should take that back. It doesn't say outright, right, that this is a true story or not, and it just has the title card at the beginning. But I think the title card does suggest a certain element of purporting to be true. And the story is also bringing with it the baggage of the underlying book, Picnic at Hanging Rock, which, of course, surrounding that story, there is this idea of it purporting itself to be true. So my point here is that there seems to be some narrative tricks or certain techniques or tactics that are being employed here. One, we have this idea of this element, maybe almost subconsciously perhaps, this element of purporting to be true, this element that is being thrust upon this whole narrative from the get-go. And then also the idea of the mystery element not necessarily following through to its own, let's say, genre expectations, shall we say. And so what I think that what occurs there is that the fact that it purports to be true seems to excuse, or perhaps it allows for the viewer to excuse the fact that the film eventually doesn't satisfy or doesn't solve the mystery. It doesn't provide the solution to the mystery, right? Because at least in my mind, I can think I'm watching the film, and if it maybe I think it's talking about a true story, and therefore if I think in my mind that it's a true story, then it might seem like well, maybe if it wasn't actually solved ever, in real life, then I can therefore accept the fact that when I'm watching the film and I reach the film's conclusion and it doesn't give me a satisfying answer as far as what happened to Miranda and Irma and Marion and Miss McCraw, I can still kind of be okay with that because it feels like something that is close to truth or close to reality. Where in fact that's probably a little bit of a narrative trick, right? Because then it means that we can excuse the film for the mystery element, but then we can focus in on what are probably its main concerns as a drama and as a cinematic work of art and as a piece of a visual, as a visual piece of art. So. Let me just stop there and let me now go to your questions and comments before I continue. So let's see here. So I'm just going to scroll down here. So again, if I miss your comments here, I apologize. But okay, so let's see. All right, so we've got a lot of people here today. So great. Matthew's here, Cinnabrew, SI's here, Tim Holm, Jambo Shango, thank you, and Randy Molshow, and Elliot, Dave B, Isaac, Wolfgratz, awesome, SJS Films. And SJS Films says you watched the film yesterday and it became an instant favorite. Probably the best first-time watch for me so far this year. Wow, that's great, SJS Films. Wolfgratz, yes, Bailey, as Annabelle V, hello from Mexico, hello, greetings from Tokyo. Roberto2653, hello from America. Sehofen, it's nice to see you. Solitary Ronin Films, great. Rob Tapscott, hello. Paula from Buffalo, hello. And yes, Matthew McNichol says, the fact that a paperback edition of the novel is included with the release is incredible. I couldn't get enough of it. Yes, I do suggest very strongly that you get you read the book. If I know some people are, maybe if people are not, well, the book is as I say, excellent. The book goes into certain elements of the story that are not at all addressed in the film. It's still, I would say, a very accurate adaptation of the novel. The film is, anyway. And so it's very, very recommended. And it goes by so quickly. And yes. Emily, my dear friend, good morning. How are you doing? Is it the same time? It's now... Gosh, I think, yeah, New Zealand and Japan are in the same time zone, perhaps. But Elliot Collins says, it's one of my favorite films. Alas, I only have the UK Second Sight Blu-ray. But the UK Second Sight Blu-ray, this is the UK Second Sight DVD. But if the Blu-ray has the original version as well as the director's cut version and all the disc extras, if the Blu-ray has the documentary, which is 113 minutes, I would say that the Second Sight release is actually better than the Criterion Collection release. Again, I apologize for Criterion Collection. I love them, as you know, but I gotta call it like I see it. I would say the Second Sight, this is the DVD, 3-disc DVD, and this is, I would say, better than the Criterion release. But the Criterion release is still excellent. So, and let's see. Oh, Nazarene Prod, my friend, hello. Paul Emery says, I saw this in 1978. I was delighted by how the resolution was handled. Many of the other audience members were quite upset. This goes, thank you so much for this. This goes towards what I was saying before about how, I'd love to hear more thoughts about that, Paul, if you could. That would be so great to listen to, because I do know that some people find the film frustrating because of the fact that the film ends the way it does, and we don't know what happened to Miranda and Irma and Marion and Miss McCraw. And in fact, well, I don't want to say anything about that, but I think for some people this can be quite a frustrating film, and I think that's a very legitimate response to have, to this film, very much so. And it's interesting too because, right, because frustration and this kind of frustration about what, not knowing what happened. I think we can see it on the faces of many of the characters here in the film itself. So it's almost as though the film's mystery is acting upon us as it is acting upon the characters within the space of the film. So I think that people feeling frustrated with this film, I think, is really legitimate, and I think it's a suggestion about how this film is doing its magic. Because if people were really, if people weren't into the film at all, then there would be no cause for feeling anything, let alone frustration. So, but I wondered if there were any other comments about that. But Paul, thank you very much for sharing. That's a really, really great comment. Let's see. Wolfgrat says it's a slightly rum idea, that title. I suppose it may build expectations lest the opening be too slow for some folk. Oh, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Kyle J. Johnson says, hi Deske, greetings from New Zealand. Yes, it's nice to see you. And Ole Christensen from Sweden, hello. And Peter Caciola, oh great, you say what a film. And All Things Film, thank you for joining us. Oh gosh, thank you so much. Casual Cinecast. Oh, and All Things Film. Yeah, you can, don't worry about it. Your initial thoughts are that you didn't mind it. That's great. That's awesome. And Casual Cinecast, hello. And Frank, oh, hello from Germany. Oh, gosh. And All Things Film says, for whatever reason, the music had me thinking back to Scarface 1983 at times. Thank you, All Things Film. Thank you for bringing up another topic. So let me just stop there with the live chat, and then just go to the next topic here, which are just some of the elements of the film that I think are that help to weave in this idea of mystery, build the atmosphere, create a mood, and just simply are examples of artistic brilliance and beauty and triumph. So we have the beautiful cinematography by Russell Boyd. We have this lovely use of sunlight and kind of a hazy fog and slow moving camera, or also frenzied handheld camera in some areas. We have stillness, and yet we have quick motion and movement. So any thoughts you have about the cinematography, please share them, and we can talk about that. Were there any particular shots that you thought were interesting and really evocative and were suggestive of this dreamlike quality of this film? Which is what I think was going on here. I think this film is trying to do a lot of things with its elements here, with the cinematography, its music, and its just the visuals. I think it's trying to create this dreamlike atmosphere, right? That is suggestive of a mystery that ends up not going anywhere. Right. So then it begs the question, right? This is almost like a dream, right? It's the paraphrasing, I think, of Edgar Allan Poe at the beginning. It's not quite the same, but it's adapted, right? So what we see and what we seem, right? A dream is a dream within a dream, and so this is the perfect way to suggest that what we're dealing with, I think, is a kind of a dream landscape, a dream-like landscape. But that's not all that I think it's going on here. And this is also, I think, suggestive of the environment, the earth, this rocky terrain, hanging rock. The idea that the earth is very unfriendly and it can be a dangerous place. And in fact, there is some suggestion that it was perhaps something to do with the rock itself, that it's something of has some kind of almost maybe a supernatural quality to it. Perhaps it was the earth that consumed these women, or something to that effect. There's also, I think, connected to that, this kind of hold on, this kind of maybe Aboriginal element to it, right? Because the music, and I think this was suggested in one of the comments made by director Peter Weir, is that the music seems to be suggesting something that is, it might have something that is not, let's say, Christian. Pagan isn't the right word, but something that is, I don't know, for lack of a better phrase, pre-Christian, something that goes way, way back to history or beyond. Miss McCraw recounts, the creation of Hanging Rock and it being, like almost 1,000,000 years old. So it predates Christ. But it's also this idea that I think it's linked not only to the earth and terrain, but there is almost a subliminal link being made to its sort of Aboriginal roots or elements or history, which I don't think is addressed in the film. And it's something that I think, I'm not sure. For me, anyway, it feels like a little bit of a weakness in the film, which is the fact that the film doesn't explicitly seem to address the history of Hanging Rock. Back with its there are certain linkages and connections made within sort of the southern Australian culture, and certain links it had with certain local tribes and sort of Aboriginal links, and that's not directly addressed in the film, at least as far as I'm concerned or I'm aware. It just, we just get the information about they're going to Hanging Rock and this is what happens. But there are subliminal links to that, I think. The music is, I think, has that, the flute, the pan flute, the Zamfir music, which is beautiful, has that kind of, it evokes that stuff, and also the fact that the film focuses in on the visuals of the rock face himself. I mean, they actually, some shots look like actual faces, which is amazing to me. There are other shots there that are amazing, like when Miranda opens the gate to the park, going to Hanging Rock, right? There's of course the famous shot of the cut to the birds flying in the sky. There are also shots of ants, right? The so-called poisonous ants eating away at some leftover cake. There's also shots of lizards or iguanas like sliding by. There are some bugs that come into the foreground, and there are other animals that come into play, but it's really a hostile environment here. So it's not just the hostility of the earth and the environment, but there's also there's some kind of supernatural element here. There's also some kind of linkages, subliminal perhaps, to some kind of Aboriginal tribe element of some deep history rooted in the landscape and the background of Australia proper. And so this seems to suggest a whole lot of differing elements at work. And that's what I love about the layering of all these cinematic things, like the music and the visual style and the like, because that is also very illustrative of how complex the whole treatment of the story is. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts about that, if you will. Just before we go to the comments, let me just say that the Zamfir flute music, which is the theme of the film. I mean, that's not the only music that's at play here. We have also classical music, where there's also original score done by, I think, Bruce Smeaton. There's one particular piece that is used, that's not the flute music and that's not the classical music, but it's a piece, I think it's called the Ascent, and it's the piece used when the girls are ascending the rock face, or they're going through they're going through Hanging Rock, and it has that kind of almost a synthesizer type of feel to it. And I can't play it here because YouTube has some policy regarding use of copyrighted music, so I don't want to play it here. But if you know what I'm talking about, it has that kind of synthesizer-like quality. And I always thought that that piece of music sounded very haunting and very chilling. It sounded almost like giallo music from a giallo Italian horror film, like Goblin score or something. And so that always suggested to me that this film is not only a dream film, it's not only a mystery film, it's not only a police procedural film, but it's also like a horror film. It's also like a sci-fi episode from the Twilight Zone. It's almost like it's a gothic romance, and it's a sort of a school drama. It's also a film about authoritarian figures and how they break down as they lose control. And it's a story about youth and the troubles of youth and how people deal with youth. And I love this because all these different elements come together, and they're within the confines of this beautiful, lush, dreamlike cinematography and this beautiful music. But there are hints and cracks of things that are just under the surface, waiting to explode into different points. And I just love that kind of dichotomy there, and it's reflective of where different elements are at play here, and it's also that's narratively mirrored in the fact that I think each of the characters is in a different place, and even the musical landscape. There are certain threads that seem to cover the entire landscape, but if you think very carefully or look very carefully, you realize that there are differences, different almost motifs and ideas and genres at work that come together here. So it really becomes a huge hodgepodge of ideas and a theory and artistic endeavor that I think make it much more complicated and therefore a very rich, rewarding experience of a film that I think merits many views, and I think it withstands many views over time. So I just love to get your thoughts about that or anything. Again, I'm sorry for the quick, haphazard way in which I speak, but let's see here. So just returning here. Oh yes, so speaking of shots that I was asking about, so Emily, thank you very much for this. It's perfect timing. Emily says, for me, that one shot of the girls' backs as they disappear behind the rock epitomizes the chilling, haunting effect of the whole film. It creates a pit in your stomach that stayed with me. That is great, yes. And it's slow motion. It has this weird kind of rumble on the soundtrack, if I recall, and this is also augmented by the fact that Irma is staying behind, and she's trying to say, Miranda, come back, but they won't listen to her because they're under some kind of spell or something. And as they disappear through the rocks, we suddenly cut to Irma and her chilling scream and the weird synth music. And then we get that shot of way overhead, and Irma running down the rock face, and we get that shot from her overhead, and it's weird cutting, and that scream is so bone chilling. So yes, that is another example. That's another example of a lot of things happening within the space of a few seconds. A mystery. Weird, almost rumblings. That's almost like a David Lynch film in terms of a soundscape, right? It's chilling, it's scary, but it's also beautiful, and it's also brightly lit and lush. And these beautiful women in these pristine white dresses are just going through this very dangerous environment, and then suddenly we get this piercing scream and this weird disjointed shot from overhead. So it's like, on the one hand, we get this beautiful landscape portrait, if you will, of these women walking slow motion, which is beautifully set up. But then suddenly everything is destroyed by a quick zoom into Irma's face and the scream, and then suddenly the camera's all wild above her head. So that's just another example, I think, of it feels like it's a beautiful film, but which it is, but then it suddenly breaks down into something that's truly horrifying. So yes, so well done, Emily. Thank you very much for that. And Cinnabrew SI, yes, you can spoil the film, so it's not a problem. So I think I've already done so. I guess, yeah. So it's not a problem at all. And oh, Joshua Brunson. Oh, my dear friend Joshua, it's nice to see you. Yes, no problem, no problem. I'd love to talk to you again about this, my dear friend. It's nice to see you, Joshua. I hope you're doing well. Let's see. Yes, Solitary Ronin Films is not the film for people who seek resolution. And Josh, let's see. Joshua Brunstein says, yes, release, particularly with regards to directors like Sofia Coppola, who I feel has made numerous films in conversation with this picture. Yes, that's a good point. I don't want to go into too much detail about the specifics of Coppola's works, but yes, I think that's very true. The Virgin Suicides, I think, comes to mind almost immediately, but that's a really excellent point, really excellent. Virgin Suicides also, by the way, it's in the Criterion Collection, yes, so... let's see. Okay, so yes, and then Emily Holland continues, says it's an ethereal kind of eeriness. That is a really great way of putting it, Emily. That's great. An ethereal kind of eeriness. An ethereal kind of eeriness. I love that. I really love that, because that, I think, gets at the heart of what I'm trying to say. But you said it much more succinctly and much better than I ever could. Emily, well done. An ethereal kind of eeriness. Ethereal, right? Because ethereal is something that's dreamlike, something that is, maybe elusive. And eeriness, something that is creepy, something that has some kind of undertone of danger and risk to it. Something that has a horror element built in, a scary factor built in. That's exactly what's going on here. Well done, well done. Let's see. Okay. And Cinnabrew SI says, anyone get Twin Peaks vibes from this? Yes, yes. I did mention David Lynch and how I thought the soundscape, especially around the rock, I thought that was very reminiscent of David Lynch and like Eraserhead. But yes, there is a bit of there's a kind of an odd quality, or not odd, but there's a certain quirky quality to many of the characters here that has a bit of there's some different tones, right, which is very similar to Twin Peaks, and also Twin Peaks, right, having to do with a mystery, right? So well done. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think a lot of people now have caught on to Cinnabrew SI's comment, and Wolfgratz, Isaac, and SJS Films, and it's also Elliot Cohen, right, are talking about how it reminds them of David Lynch works. So that's really interesting. And also Elliot Cohen. Yes, Elliot Cohen, I'm skipping it. It says, the film also always reminds me of the film What Have You Done to Solange? So I definitely agree that Picnic has a bit of giallo feel to it. Yes, What Have You Done to Solange? Yes, well done. Well done. Yes, well done indeed. Oh gosh. And Bailey Walsh says, hypnotic quality. Hypnotic quality is such a great description of the film. She is referring to something that Isaac has said. So Isaac referred to it as having a hypnotic quality, and Bailey is agreeing. So yes, that's great. That's also, I think, something that I would agree with. And Raven Q222 says, this movie feels more like a dream than something I saw with my own eyes. That is a really interesting. Approach, Raven Q222. That is really interesting. It feels more like a dream than something I saw with my own eyes. Yes, it does. It does. And I think that's also something that helps me anyway, excuse the film for not solving the mystery. And so, gosh, and yes, and I think there is a great discussion here about, oh, Jared, hello, it's nice to see you, and it's really great, and oh, great. So there's a discussion here now about, there's a discussion about Rachel Roberts as Mrs. Appleyard. And I think it's well documented in the Criterion supplements and also in the Second Sight supplements that Rachel Roberts wasn't the first choice. There was, in fact, another actor that had been hired to play Mrs. Appleyard. I think it was Vivian Merchant. Vivian Merchant was a very famous actor, and she might be known. Let's see. Well, I think she was. Let's see. She, according to the supplements, she had fallen ill at the very last minute, and so she couldn't play the role of Mrs. Appleyard, and so the producers had to scramble at the very last minute. And I think, according to Peter Weir in one of the supplements, he had said that he had seen Rachel Roberts in the film Murder on the Orient Express by Sidney Lumet. And she does appear in that film. And so she was available, and so she decided to come on. And oh boy, Rachel Roberts as Mrs. Appleyard. Man, oh man, I don't know how you feel about Mrs. Appleyard, but this is another question that I have. You know, how do you feel about the characters in this film? There are so many, and they come from many different places. There's, of course, Miranda and Irma and Marion, the three young women who disappeared. And also there's Miss Greta McCraw, who is the math teacher, who also disappeared. She was also in Neighbors, right? She was Mrs. Mangle in Neighbors, right? A long time ago. But she has a very interesting presence in the film. But there's also the other teachers in the school. There's, in particular, Mamselle, Helen Morse. There's also the young man, Michael, and Albert. And also there is, of course, Mrs. Appleyard. And I think for me, the film is just, it falls apart without Rachel Roberts as Mrs. Appleyard. I think her performance here is frightening. Absolutely frightening. It's frightening how cool and collected it is at the beginning, when she is just giving, trying to maintain control over these young girls, and in particular with such scary and tragic results as does occur with the young girl Sarah, right? Miss Sarah Wayborn, which is a very tragic element of the story. But it's just amazing how she seems to represent Mrs. Appleyard seems to be representing this idea of almost an authoritarian control, and this is exemplified by how she seems to be trying to, maybe not intentionally, but she is in effect destroying any hopes of creativity that might have existed within Sarah. Right, when Sarah's by herself, when the other girls are away on the excursion to Hanging Rock, right, she has to recite the poem by Felicia Hemans, and she doesn't, because she resists. Why does she resist? Because she wants to recite a poem that she wrote by herself, and Mrs. Appleyard said, she dismisses this, and she calls her a little, an ignoramus. And I always thought that that was such a brutal scene, because Sarah is, as we know, is such a poignant and tragic character. And I think had she been able to express herself and to express her creativity with this poem that she obviously had a lot of thought about, because it was as long as she claims it has as many verses as was it the wreck of the Hesperus, right? Which is not a right. Well, anyway, so so in fact it was, and she seems to be a character that is maybe infatuated with, perhaps even in love with Miranda. But my point is that I think Mrs. Appleyard does her best to destroy any hopes at creativity, at least at this point in your life and in her life. And it's just a link to something that eventually leads to a very tragic event in the film. And I find, therefore, that it's interesting how the film essentially seems to supplant that the mystery element with this whole element here of the school life and Mrs. Appleyard and her essential breakdown, and essentially how that basically destroys this place, and in particular this one young woman, Sarah, in terms of what happens to her at the very end of the film. And the film thus becomes not a mystery, it becomes a tragedy, and it becomes a brutal drama, and it becomes almost a gothic horror film in many respects, which is driven by the monster. And the monster here, I think, is not the monster that consumed the three women, whatever that monster may be, and I mean that in metaphorical terms, of course. But it's not the monster that caused the mystery, but in fact it's the monster that is, I would say, Mrs. Appleyard. I mean, she is a real monster in this film, a real monster. And Rachel Roberts, I think, plays her so brilliantly. The way that the hair slowly falls apart and becomes more disheveled as she's beginning to lose control over the whole situation, and also the way in which she trembles and she goes to drink. Remember, as she starts to pull the stuff out of her desk drawer there, as more students begin to leave, right? And one of my favorite moments in the film is when she is sitting alone at dinner with Mademoiselle at the very end of the film, after the girls have left the school, and she's talking about, about Bournemouth. Ah, yes, Bournemouth. And by this time, she's completely gone. And also by this time, there's some weird timing as far as what happened to Sarah at the end. What did Mrs. Appleyard know? What did Mrs. Appleyard do? Ah, that's a mystery. Talk about a mystery, right? I think the essential mystery here is not essentially about what happened to the three girls, although that's a key mystery of the film. But for me, the more pressing mystery is what happened to Sarah, and what did Mrs. Appleyard know? I mean, that is the more pressing mystery to me, that goes to this idea of Mrs. Appleyard being such a monstrous figure, and it's exemplified, at least for me, by that scene at the dinner with Mademoiselle, and she's talking about Bournemouth, and then suddenly she's drinking. She offers Mademoiselle another drink, and Mademoiselle politely refuses. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, Mrs. Appleyard just suddenly goes like that. And she goes into this kind of rant about, I came to depend on Greta McCraw, which is the math teacher who disappeared, and her keen masculine intellect. Wow, this comes out of nowhere, and what a weird turn of phrase, right? Masculine intellect. There's so many quirky elements to this film that keep me on edge. You know, she calls Sarah ignoramus. I think the doctor, when she, this is completely different, but the doctor, when he's talking about the young girls and medically examining them, he always uses the phrase, you know, they are quite intact. You know, that's so weird. This is a film that's filled with so many weird things. And Mrs. Appleyard's speech at the end here is, I think, another example of that. You know, keen masculine intellect in Greta McCraw, and suddenly she just goes into this fury, and then she comes out of it again. And when Mademoiselle's asking about, is Sarah going to come back this term, Mrs. Appleyard is completely gone and goes back to, ah yes, Bournemouth. Ah, that's such a great moment, such a chilling moment. And of course, the last shot of Mrs. Appleyard and the black and the way that she looks toward the camera, towards us, and then we hear the clock ticking and it stops. The clock stops. And it's not a freeze frame, you can tell, because she's still blinking. That is one of the scariest images I've ever seen in a film in a long time. Would you agree? That is a scary image. Man, Rachel Roberts certainly knew how to put on a show. And so that's just an example of a performance that I really love. But let me now just take a moment to go back to your chat here and see what the chat might come up here. So let's see. Oh yes, Wolfgrat says, I think Anne-Louise Lambert added Louise later in her career. That's a good point. Yes, I don't know too much about her career after Hanging Rock, but that's certainly, yes, thank you for that information. So I'm just going to skip around here, just comments. So I apologize if I skipped. Okay, Sean, hello, my friend. It's nice to see you. And great. NipTuck117, it's nice to see you, my friend. And J Manxy Z2, I hope I got that right, from Texas. Hello, it's nice to see you. Great. Carl Reese, yes, hello, my friend. Master25, hello. Oh, great. Wonderful. And now there's a discussion about the releases, the Criterion releases. Solitary Ronin films talking about Miss McCall went to Ramsey Street. Yes, that's a reference to Neighbors. I think the actor who played Miss Lumley, Miss Dora Lumley, was also in Neighbors as well. But please correct me if I'm wrong. That was way after I stopped watching Neighbors. But oh gosh. Let's see. I'm sorry. I'm just going through here. Yes, there's discussion here about the music. Oh, this is interesting. Solitary Ronin Films is making a comment here about the music, which is, I think, a great comment. He says, I found at times the score was overbearing at times. A little silence would have been welcome. That is really great. Yes, it does have a certain post-production overlayering element to the feel of it. I do understand what you're saying, Solitary Ronin Films. Raven Q222 says, the use of light is so beautiful. Love how the Virgin Suicides took inspiration from it. This is a great point too, Raven Q222. Thank you. And I think other people have mentioned it, of course, but it's really weird and interesting how many of the scenes of fright and horror and eeriness occur in daytime and in the bright light. That's really interesting to me, and some of the weird things happen not in old dark houses, or not, the rock face is way out in the open. And even the shots, right, that happen kind of at night and at the daytime, when Michael is doing his own personal search for the girls, and he's going through that weird writhing thing, and suddenly there's a wound that appears out of nowhere on the top part of his forehead here. Did you notice that? It just happens out of nowhere. which mirrors a wound that happened with Irma when she returns, right? So they have a similar kind of wound. But as far as Michael's concerned, right, there's a weird kind of almost Moog synthesizer type of soundtrack score, and then he's writhing on the ground, and he's suddenly all wounded, and it all occurs either in brightly lit decor or in nighttime, but it's almost brightly lit nighttime. So there's never any kind of dark, shadowy presence, and yet it's still frightening. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. JD, greetings from Norway. Absolutely love this film. Fantastic. Yes, yes. And oh gosh, this is such a great conversation. And GI Joe's Feb '08. Yes, regarding the music, it has an interesting juxtaposition between Western music, organ, Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, etc., and Aboriginal music. Oh, that's an interesting way of taking it, yes. I don't know if the if the Zamfir music is necessarily meant to reflect direct Aboriginal music per se, but Aboriginal music in the sense of what it's, I think, trying to suggest or evoke as an artistic expression. I agree with you in that regard, 100%. That's a really great comment, really, really great. And let's see, yes, music is hypnotic. Music is almost a tool of manipulation on the part of the filmmaker. Yes, of course it is. Yes, it's really a great point. And yes, I'm just going through the comments here. Sorry if I'm skipping over, but it's a great conversation here as always. Gosh, great. This is great. All right, I'm sorry about this. Yes, and yes, I was talking about the characters here about Mrs. Appleyard, but just related to that conversation that I was just having. Solitary Ronin Film says, Miranda has the answer. She knew she was going away. Yes, so this, I think, is me making reference to the conversation that Miranda has at the beginning with Sarah. Well, not conversation, I don't know if Sarah doesn't even, I don't think she says anything in that part of the film, does she? She just basically listens to what Miranda has to say, which I think is very suggestive of how Sarah is so infatuated with Miranda. But Miranda is combing her hair in front of the two mirrors there, the big mirror and the little mirror. And then there's a sudden close-up of her face and say, you have to learn to love someone else. I'm not going to be here for very much longer, or at least I'm paraphrasing, which is a very interesting quote, right? Because she contradicts herself in a way, right? Later in the film when she is leaving the picnic with the girls, and she says to Mademoiselle, she says, don't worry, Mademoiselle, we won't be gone for very long. And so she seems to be contradicting herself on those 2 points, but of course, the second occasion is, I think, meant as a bit of ironic sting, of course. But I think the first occasion, which is what Solitary Ronin Films is referring to, is significant because it's almost suggestive of the fact that she might have had second sight. She knew that she was going away. It probably had to do, at least in the direct narrative terms, with the fact that maybe she knew that Sarah had maybe she had a kind of infatuation with Miranda that might have been bordering on something that Miranda felt couldn't last forever. There's mention of this later about how Sarah wrote a love poem to Miranda, and Miranda sort of brushes off when when Edith is saying, I'm sorry, maybe I might be getting the names of the girls confused along the way. So if I do that, if I've done that before, I apologize. But Edith says she makes a reference to the fact that Sarah wrote a poem to Miranda, and then Miranda brushes off and says, she's an orphan, meaning Sarah, she's an orphan. And so there is kind of an undercurrent, perhaps, of of infatuation, perhaps love. And I think Peter Weir in the documentaries materials tends to be he tends to brush off any direct interpretation of a kind of lesbian attention or lesbianism in the film amongst the characters. He tends to brush off that interpretation. I don't think I don't think it's really at the forefront. It's not necessarily the point of the film, although there is there is a kind of veiled erotic nature to many of the aspects of the film. I do see that, but I don't think we're given enough time with the relationship between Miranda and Sarah to get that sense. And I think that's very wise on the part of Peter Weir. I think that's the reason why he might be brushing off any kind of direct or attempt at direct interpretation of lesbianism in the film, because we're not given enough time to focus on the relationships between the characters per se. We're basically given this information about Hanging Rock, and then suddenly they disappear. And so so I think that's I think that's an indication of the fact that the mystery element is at the forefront of this narrative, rather than any kind of erotic or homoerotic or aspect to the relationship between the characters. But I'm not saying that it's completely absent, but it's certainly an aspect that I think is there, but I'm not sure how strong it is. Let me put it that way. But in the context of Sarah, yes, right. Sarah seems to be very, very infatuated with Miranda, almost to the point of emotional dependence. And so therefore, I think Miranda was speaking towards this when she's saying, I'm not going to be here much longer, meaning perhaps that Miranda knew that this relationship wasn't going to be a good one. But also, I think, metaphorically too, I think Miranda perhaps had some kind of second sight into what was going to happen to her in the rest of the film. So Solitary Ronin, that's a very good comment that you made there. Miranda has the answer. She knew she was going away. Let's see. So just returning to the chat here, and there's a chat here about. Yes, great. There's a discussion here about different films, Australian films, so I'm not going to touch upon that directly, but I think it's a great discussion, so well done. I'm going to look at that in detail after I finish this, so great. Okay, so just skipping around here again. Hold on. Sorry about this. I just pushed the button. Oh gosh, okay. Again, I apologize for my lack of control over the technology here, but please forgive me. Okay. I just pushed the button, and that made me skip down below. I'm thinking back, and I think I might have referred to the shot that Emily was talking about when the three girls were going into the rock. I might have, maybe if I go back and replay this, I might have referred to the girl screaming who's left behind. Did I call her Irma by mistake? I should have called her Edith. If I called her Irma by mistake, I apologize. The three girls who went into the rock and disappeared are Miranda, Irma, and Marion. Marion is the one with the glasses, and she seems to be keen on studying. Irma's the one is the brunette, and she actually returns, and she comes back with the red dress to say goodbye to the girls. And oh man, yeah, I'm sure she wished she hadn't done that. And then Miranda is the kind of the leader. She is, in the words of Mademoiselle, she is like a Botticelli angel. And those are the three that disappear. The one that doesn't disappear, the one who's described rather unflatteringly by Michael as the dumpy one, that's Edith. And Edith is a particularly interesting character, especially what happens to Irma. And I'll just address that in a second, but let me just go to the chat here. Yes, so great chat here. Great chat. Yes, there's discussion here of comparisons with virgin suicides, which is great. Carl Reese brings up three women, Altman's three women, which is great. And Cinnabrew SI says, you can call me Raphael. Great. I will. Oh gosh, Nicholas Hill. Hello, Nicholas. You say, oh yes, the Ascent music by Bruce Smeaton. It sounds familiar to Elton John's "Funeral for a Friend, Love Lies Bleeding," released 2 years earlier to this film. Influence, perhaps. Wow, that's an interesting observation. Never. Wow, that's really interesting, Nicholas. Thank you so much for that. Wow. Huh. Huh. Gosh. Gosh, you guys are so on top of things. Wow. Oh, great. And yes, okay, then Peter Cacciolo says, Mrs. Appleyard was just plain scary. Her hair reminded me of Dracula. Wow, that's great. Yes, yes, her hair, her wig. Yes. There's a great story about that Peter Weir recounts about Rachel Roberts and the wig. Check it out if you can. It's really funny. And yeah, and people are hopping onto that comment that Peter made. It's great. Sean Gallagher says, it's funny you say that. I thought Appleyard may have inspired the look of the old Gary Oldman Dracula and Bram Stoker's Dracula. Oh my goodness, that's really interesting. I never thought about that. But you're right. That's really interesting. That might be another kind of subliminal trait in Mrs. Appleyard that makes her villainous and monstrous. Wow, that's really great. Ah, that is such a great observation. And Solitary Ronin Films hops onto that and says, "Good shout, Peter. All she needed was a straight razor." Yes, I think that's a reference to a particular shot of Dracula and her straight razor in the film Bram Stoker's Dracula. Oh, that's great. And then Bailey Walsh says, "Okay, now I'm just picturing Mrs. Appleyard as Dracula instead of Gary Oldman in Coppola's film." Oh my goodness, Peter, that is a great observation. I think I'm not going to be able to see Mrs. Appleyard in the same light ever again. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Oh, and speaking of comparisons to other works, I think there's discussion of Persona, Bergman's Persona. Yes, yes, this is great. And oh gosh, gosh. Oh, J Manxie Z2 says, I actually found Sergeant Bumper to be very interesting. So that's the police sergeant who is, he is bearded and he's seen questioning some of the people, and he's also seen at home with his wife and talking about the case. So yes, that's a really interesting thing too. He's very precise. He's not, he's very intelligent. He's very sharp, right? I remember the interrogation he had with Michael at the beginning, and Michael's talking about how he saw the girls in the woods. And he says at first, Michael says that there were three of them, but then Michael then explains that there were four of them. And I think the sergeant catches this and said, "Oh, I thought you said there were three, but you said there were four." And so he's very sharp, and that's then adds an extra layer of suspicion, does it not? Clouds of suspicion form around Michael. At least they do, potentially do. But yeah, that's a really great comment, J Mang CZ2. Really well done. It's a stand-in for the audience. I agree with you. I agree. And, there's talk here about cries and whispers. Bergman's cries and whispers in Persona. But I would also suggest that there's, the cries and whispers, like Mrs. Appleyard feels like a character who could have existed in the world of cries and whispers. I don't know, food for thought perhaps, but yeah, I think Sean Gallagher is mentioning cries and whispers. He's saying, "I foolishly watched Cries and Whispers after the Virgin Suicides." Wow, that is amazing double feature. And oh yes, Isaac Dunn says, "I hope you're going to talk about the estrangement of the two adopted siblings in the film." Yes, yes, I will talk about that in a second. Thank you for reminding me. But Bailey then says, "I find such a contrast between Mrs. Appleyard and her scenes compared to most of the film, particularly in the beginning, because her outfits and shots are so dark, whereas the girls are usually in white." That is a great observation, Bailey. Well done. Yes, yes, Mrs. Appleyard is often seen in the dark. She is often seen, not always, but often seen inside her office, inside her room, wearing dark clothes, faded clothes, browns that turn to blacks. And she's shot at night when she confronts the carriage when it returns from their picnic at Hanging Rock. She's seen at night outside. And she's isolated as well. You know, when she's talking to the girls at the beginning, she's not seen together with them. She's seen talking down at them at a distance. And I think in the special features, it was mentioned that Rachel Roberts actually asked to have her shots of that particular scene shot so the girls weren't there, and because she felt that the girls really hated her. And in fact, I think there was talk about how Rachel Roberts was really into the role. Some interesting stories in the behind the scenes footage, or the documentaries, if you're interested. So very good indeed. And now there's talk in the chat about the yes, Sarah, and this is a really just talk about the conversation I had about Sarah. And Isaac reminds us about the relationship between Sarah and Albert, or Bertie, right? And this is a very interesting connection, right? Because Albert, right, there's Albert in the film, Albert and Michael and their story. But Albert it seems to suggest that Albert and Sarah are siblings, brother and sister, who were separated for some reason. They were together when they were young, and they were in an orphanage, but then they were separated. And so now they don't know where the other is. And it's amazing because apparently they were very close to each other all the time. And they were connected, of course, by this mystery, by the mystery of the disappearance of these women. And it's interesting, too, because Sarah didn't go on the picnic. She didn't go on the picnic to Hanging Rock. But it's interesting to note that had she been able to go on the picnic, it could have been that Bertie, Albert, might have seen her, because she probably would have gone on the excursion to the rock face itself, or up through the rocks with the other four girls. And so remember, Albert and Michael were in the woods by themselves, drinking and just looking at the girls. It would have been interesting to see, to imagine what Bertie's reaction would have been had he seen Sarah along with the other girls walking through the woods. And yes, there is a connection, right? Because Sarah calls out to Bertie every now and then, especially in times of duress and stress. And he says, "Oh, Bertie, oh, Bertie." And at the end, of course, there's that really memorable scene of Bertie, or Albert, talking with Michael. And Albert reveals the dream that he had about how his sister, Sarah, visited him in the dream to say goodbye. And this is a very poignant timing, of course, because this seems to fall at the exact point in the film where I think we can say that Sarah died, right? Because Sarah was told the night before that she would have to be leaving the school and to be returned to the orphanage. And then there's a shot of her face, and there's some eerie shots of Mrs. Appleyard, and then there's a shot of an empty bed, which I think we can assume can be Sarah's empty bed. And we never see Sarah alive again. And the next shots are the shots of, I assume, to be morning or daytime, where Albert is talking about the dream that he had about his sister visiting him. And so this is this goes into pretty dark territory. You're talking about death, suicide or murder. I'm not sure. I think it's suicide, but it's pretty gruesome stuff. Whichever way you look at it. And so yes, so there is this does add to a kind of supernatural element of the film, perhaps, maybe almost a ghostly or ethereal quality. Again, connection via dreams. And in fact, if this film is a dream, then the dream that Albert is talking about is, in fact, a dream within a dream, right? The very words by which the film opens up, right? So this is just, it's like Inception and Christopher Nolan's Inception, I suppose. But it has a very at this point, when we're talking about dreams within dreams, it's not just taking on an air of beauty and mystery. Now it's taking on a real air of sinister gravity, because by this time I think we can sense that something really terrible might have befallen the lovely Sarah. And so, yes, thank you very much, Isaac, for that. Well done. And yes, this is great. And Anna, yes, just going through the comments here, and Annabelle V says, yes, that last shot of Mrs. Appleyard is perfect. I also noticed that throughout the movie we see and hear many clocks ticking. That makes even more relevant the fact that the clocks stop in Hanging Rock. Yes, yes. I think there's also a reference to a later work that Joan Lindsay wrote, but also in terms of clocks, right? The clocks or the watches stop at 12. When the at the picnic at Hanging Rock, and also the clock, the ticking clock stops at the end of the film with Mrs. Appleyard. So you're absolutely right, and we do hear ticking clocks throughout the work. So when you watch the film again, keep an ear open for ticking clocks. It's really interesting. Yes, yes, and everyone's hopping on the conversation here. This is great. This is great. Oh, Isaac Dunn says, "What are your thoughts on the scene where Mademoiselle hits Edith?" Yes, so I think Isaac's talking about the scene where Irma visits the school after she has been found and she is recovered. Irma visits the school and she says goodbye because she's going back to her parents in Europe, and the girls are in the barn or something, and they're doing they're I think it's a music class, but they're also working on their posture or dance. I think I'm not sure what is it, a dance class or something, but they're all lined up there in two rows, and then Irma comes in this bright red dress, fiery, and she comes to say goodbye, but no one seems to be happy to see her. And in fact, on the contrary, they just suddenly just attack her and go this huge frenzy. And what's interesting is Edith, one of the girls who was basically affected by this mystery. She was right. It's she who is the first one to scream at Irma. I find that to be such a wonderfully ironic touch, right? You'd think that Edith, of all people, she would be the one who'd be most understanding of what happened to Irma and the situation that befell her. But no. She's the first one who goes off on Irma. And in fact, Edith, I think, is a very unlikable character. I think purposefully so. Incidentally, you should really check out the special features on the Second Sight release, because there is some really great discussion by the actress who plays Edith. Such a lovely, lovely human being. Totally not like Edith, the character that she plays. The actress who plays Edith, such a warm, you can tell how warm a person she is. So I urge you to watch that documentary. But as a character, yes, she's the first one who goes off on Irma, and then just that starts the whole thing with this girl screaming and Miss Lumley cowering behind the chair like a coward, and then Mademoiselle is the one who's trying to take control of the situation, and she slaps Edith, right? And she says, "You're a liar," boom, right? And so I think there's a bit of frustration that's been built up against the Edith character from the very get-go, right? She's not very likable, and she's always whining. She seems to ask odd questions. Doomed. What's that mean, Irma? Right? And she's really hard to get information from. Right? They're trying to ask her questions afterwards, but she seems to be a bit kind of out of it, or she seems not to be listening to the questions and all that. And so there's certainly a bit of frustration, I'm sure, on the part of Mamselle. But I think it's also reflective of the fact that, but that Edith is not a wholly sympathetic character. And I think that's on purpose, right? Because I think that adds to the layer of frustration that these characters are feeling. All right. I mean, I hate that. This is a terrible way of putting it, of course, and it's really terrible. But because of the sanctity of human life, of course. But it's almost like I can almost sense that, perhaps from Mamselle's point of view, she really, she really has a kind of connection to the girls that went missing, and in particular Miranda. I mean, she goes out of her way to call Miranda Botticelli Angel. And so, yeah, it's a very, I sense a great deal of frustration in that moment when she basically slaps Edith, calls her a liar. But that's a really powerful moment. Thank you, Isaac, for that. Gosh, I just pushed the button again. Man. Sorry about this. I just pushed the button. Yeah, Jared Wignall asks, "What is your favorite Peter Weir film? Is this a film? Is this the film, or do you enjoy another film of his more? I really enjoy Truman Show as well as Dead Poet Society. Witness is also a fine film. Yeah. Not to go into too much detail about Peter Weir, but yes, I do like those films very much. And I do like this film very much. I haven't seen all of Peter Weir's films, to be perfectly honest, but and also an interesting film that comes to mind, which I think was discussed, is the film called The Last Wave. That's a really weird film, really great film. Yes, and yes, and Emily brings up a great point here. I think that the whole film has a certain homoerotic undercurrent because Mamselle also seems to be infatuated with Miranda. Yes, thank you. I was just speaking of that, right? Botticelli Angel. And also, I would also say that it's like even Mrs. Appleyard. Mrs. Appleyard has what could be described as being almost an infatuation with Sarah Wayborn. And I don't quite know to what degree that might be in tandem with or parallel to your observation of Mademoiselle's view of Miranda. But there's also a bit of it's almost like, right, regardless of whether you think there's any homoerotic undertone or not, but the parallel relationships here, it seems to be Mademoiselle and Miranda on the one hand, and Mrs. Appleyard and Sarah Wayborn on the other. Very interesting. Well said, Emily, as always. And Bailey Walsh says is making comment here. I haven't seen it yet. I've seen more focus on lesbian themes in the Amazon Prime series from last year. So I haven't seen the recent TV is it 6 episodes of Picnic at Hanging Rock. I really would love to see that. I haven't been able to get a hold of it here in Japan, but I'll try to look for it. And yeah, I'm just going through the chat here, which is really great. Great, well done. Oh yes, well done. This is a great discussion here. Again, the talk is about. Yes, and then Bailey Walsh is just now saying, I particularly think the scene when Irma returns to the school and the other girls attack her is one of the most fascinating scenes in the film. Yes, and that's the scene I was just referring to, Bailey, so great timing. And Wolfgrat says, I'm glad I'm not alone in my dislike of Edith. Yes, so Edith is sort of a sub-villain. Maybe villain is too strong a word, but she is a kind of sub-villain here. And... there's a scene at the beginning where at Valentine's Day, where people are handing Valentines, and it's Edith who is basically seen by herself counting the Valentines in her bed, and I think it's Peter Weir in one of the, it could be Peter Weir, maybe I'm misremembering, but in one of the documentaries, it's mentioned that perhaps Edith was sending all these Valentines to herself. I mean, that's not shown explicitly in the film, but it's implied, right? Because she has so many, she's counting so many Valentines, but knowing her character, you know, are there really that many people who like her, at least within the universe of the film? It's interesting. Again, once again, please, I urge you to check out this set, because the actor who plays Edith is such a great person. You can tell she's so kind. I mean, I don't want to. Okay, Christine Schuler. Christine Schuler is her name, so she plays Edith, and she is such a lovely interviewee, and she talks about. In particular, she has some really moving words to say about the actor Jane Vallis, who played Marion Quaid. Such a lovely woman. I think totally unlike Edith, the character she played, but what a wonderful, wonderful. So. Yeah, but that's just again just to further emphasize the fact that Edith is very unlikable as a character. Yes. And gosh, this is, yes, so just going through the chat here, and I think, great, I'm all caught up here. So I think what I want to ask, yes, and then yes, Wolfgrat says, you know, Edith sent herself all those 11 Valentines. Yes, 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 exactly. And so the next thing I wanted to ask is, how do you think this film fits into the context of the conversation of, let's say, greatest films? You know, its significance in terms of great films, great works of art. What I mean, I think people, myself included, I mean, I feel like it's a really great film. It's a fascinating film. It's a film for me that is so memorable. It's one of my favorite releases in the Criterion Collection. It's one film that I love to watch many, many times. I think I might have mentioned it in the video that I did about films that I watch many, many times. I can watch this film for days and never tire of it. It has a certain hypnotic quality, and it lends itself so nicely to mysteries. And there was even a comparison made to like Twin Peaks. Our friend Cinebrew SI Raphael made a connection to Twin Peaks, and I concur with that. And I think a part of that also is the fact that it lends itself so nicely to rewatchability. But well, how do you feel about its place in, let's say, the pantheon of quote-unquote great films? Hold on here. There you go. You know, is it for you? Is it a great film? Is it a film that is worthy of? I mean, I hate to turn it to this discussion, because some of you may know I really hate. I really try to avoid distinctions between, let's say, great films and favorite films and genre films. You know, I always find that everything is all in the same and equal, and even a quote unquote genre film, it can potentially be a great film and can potentially be an important film, and you know, there's nothing that prevents that, and so I don't I hesitate taking the conversation in this direction, but the reason why I bring it up is because. You know, I think, what is it? What is its significance to you? What is its significance? Because for me, I admit that it's a story that it's very engrossing, very captivating. But I've never been to Hanging Rock. I've never visited Hanging Rock. To be perfectly honest, I don't know much about the history of Hanging Rock. and I don't have, therefore, this connection with Hanging Rock or the landscape and the environment. I've never been to Australia. I always love to go, but I've never even been, and I don't have an understanding of Australian culture or cinema, let alone Australian cinema. And so, in a lot of respects, this film is very foreign to me, and it's very foreign to my own personal experience. It's very unusual, and I think in many regards, it's a story that I find very difficult to connect with on some levels. There are certain class issues. There are certain class issues between, let's say, Albert and Michael, that, to be perfectly honest, I don't quite get. Which is why I really appreciate the relationship between Albert and Michael. When they talk for the first time, I love the bit, and it's remarked upon in one of the features, but I love the bit where Albert offers him the bottle to drink, and Michael is about to rub off the top there, but then he decides against it, and he just drinks out of the bottle straight, and to show a kind of connection. Before then, there was a real class distinction between the two, but then I think that moment really equalizes them, at least to a certain degree. But apart from, so I love the fact that the film tends to equalize these people, but I can't really speak to the class distinctions that occur with the Fitzhuberts, for example. I can't really speak to the class distinctions that seem to exist among the girls. Irma, for example, seems to be from a very wealthy family, although I'm not quite sure. Edith, I'm not quite sure what her status is as well. And Mrs. Appleyard as well, and what her history is. And there seems to be this past history with Mr. Appleyard, and the fact that she is now in Australia, and this idea of English coming to Australia. My history about that is not so good. So in a lot of respects, this film is very distant to me and very foreign to me. And so on paper, it shouldn't be something that I should connect with. And to be perfectly frank, I don't connect with those elements, and so I can't really speak to the film's significance within the context of, let's say, Australian history or Australian cinema. But on terms that I can understand, namely the direct and intimate terms of the narrative, and it's presenting a mystery and a real harrowing human drama to me, I can really see it as being a great film because it seems to be a film that is talking about this idea of freedom and the yearning for freedom and youth and creativity, as we see with Miranda and in particular Sarah, and how this, and also this idea of trying to break free from some kind of confines that exist, that I think are representative, or that are represented by Mrs. Appleyard and her truly horrifying authoritarian rule over this world of Appleyard College. There's also this idea of trauma, of emotional trauma, and how one deals with emotional trauma and what one does in the face of emotional trauma and a real emotionally devastating event. How does one deal with this? And I think we see the permutations and the different variations occur for each character. For instance, Michael takes it upon himself to try to find the girls because perhaps he even might have a certain, who knows, maybe it could have bordered on a romantic obsession with Miranda in particular, but he tries to be proactive. He tries to seek out the girls to the best of his ability. And Albert, too, as well, to a certain extent. But also Albert has, I think, an affinity towards Michael as well, which I think spurs him on. More so, in other words, for Michael, it's more about the girls, but I think for Albert, it is about the girls, but it's also about his friendship with Michael. And then we have Mademoiselle, who seems to be trying to care for all of the girls in the school, despite this horrible situation that's going on. She has a real emotional connection with these women that I think is really fascinating. Mrs. Appleyard, of course, is in a completely different area, in a completely different headspace. She's trying to maintain control. She's trying to figure out the finances of the school, and she's in a completely different world. And she almost treats herself like a not a villain, but she almost considers herself like a victim in this, because she's saying, how could Greta McCraw let herself be abducted like that or something, and so she's almost playing the victim card here. And also there's Sarah, who's really just lost and bereft without Miranda. And then there's the police, Sergeant Bumper and the police procedural, and all the characters are in a different place by the end of the film, and so it seems to be suggestive of this idea of how different people deal with emotional trauma, and I think we see this in other great films. And there in the chat, there's discussion made comparison with Bergman films, and I think we see this idea of how to deal with trauma in Bergman films in a frankly, I think in a very similar way in Peter Weir's film here. So I think it's a nice callback, and also this idea of, speaking of Bergman, I mean, this idea of I guess maybe more generally, or more maybe ephemerally, to use Emily's words, would be like this idea of loss, because I always felt that the film is an embodiment of loss, the concept of loss, how one deals with loss, and this is a really painful type of loss too. It's the loss that has no resolution. It's a loss that has no explanation. I think that's one of the worst types of loss ever. And so the film therefore feels like it's an embodiment of this feeling that one might have when one encounters loss. And it's weird too, I don't know how you feel, but like when I think back on moments in my life where I maybe had experienced, maybe not an extreme degree of loss necessarily, but in my own personal way, maybe I felt that I was experiencing a certain type of loss, okay? And it was there was a moment, there would be some intense couple days there, right, where I'd feel very emotionally stressed or something. I can look back on those moments now and I think it's almost like a dream, and I think back on those moments because I was so emotionally stressed, and I think back and I did things. When you do things in emergency situations, they're out of the ordinary, and so they seem almost unreal. Like going to different places that you've never been, going to different hospitals that you've never been, or meeting people that you've never met before. And it all happens within the space of a few days, and it's a flurry and a rush. And I think back to it now, and those moments of loss or emotional stress seem to me now to be very fleeting and almost dreamlike, which is really weird. And therefore, I always thought that this film was, to me, such a great embodiment of the feelings one had with loss, at least my feelings, because they deal with this idea of how to deal with emotional trauma. But then also they deal with it, the film deals with it in a way it's very dreamlike and almost unreal. And I feel that way about my own memories and my own dealings with loss back when I was younger. They feel unreal to me. I know they happen, but they always feel like I would have a little something in the back of my mind that has a little bit of doubt. Did I really experience those moments, or did I dream them? And so I always found this film to be fascinating on that respect, because it always reminded me of feelings of loss, and so I feel like, therefore, if this film is like an embodiment of loss, thus it can be said that the film is a kind of extension or a visual representation of an aspect of one's life that I think is very key, because it keys into certain emotions that we potentially can experience throughout the contours of our own lives, namely tragedy and loss. And so I find this film to be very important because it's like an extension or a manifestation or a visual manifestation of this feeling that I think we all have the potential of sharing, for better or for worse. And so I think as a representation of what it is that, I don't mean to use lofty terms, but as a representation of what it is to be kind of human in a certain, in this sort of way, I think this film has great significance, incredible significance. And so I wonder what your take is about this. But sorry about going off there. I don't mean to be too grandiose, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to get at. But anyway, let me just return to the chat here. So just give me 1 second here. I'm sorry I'm skipping around, but all right. So Peter Cacciola says, okay, forgive me and my ignorance, but does ending a film in the middle justify calling it art? It was acted well and the shots are very nice, but I have to look deeper into the film. So this, I think your comment addresses kind of exactly what I was speaking to. I don't know if what I said makes sense, but Peter, what do you think about what I said? If you disagree, of course, please let me know. I won't be offended at all. The Cinematech says, living in Australia, I was able to visit Hanging Rock last year. It is a really eerie experience. You can hear the voices of the girls through speakers placed around the rock. No kidding. That is really weird. Wow. I'd love to go visit one day. Wow. Wow, this is amazing. Oh, Stefan Moon, hello, Stefan. It's nice to see you. Gosh. So now there's a discussion here, which is great timing, based on Peter's comment about the aesthetics, the aesthetic justification for this film. And Wolfgratz, I think, says something very interesting. He says, I don't think it ends in the middle, Peter. It ends at the end. I get you may not like the end, but that's a different issue. Yeah, I completely understand Peter's comment, and I completely understand Wolfgratz's comment here. And it addresses the way in which this film can frustrate, which is what I was trying to get at earlier. Yeah, a great discussion between Wolfgratz and Peter here. Well done, the two of you. Well done. Gosh, I'm so sorry. This computer, I try to scroll down and it suddenly gets to the very bottom. So if I've missed your name, I apologize sincerely. I really apologize. I'm trying to get, okay, Parking Lot 1918. Hello, Parking Lot 1918. It's nice to see you. And Emily, you're talking to GI Joe Feb 08. Emily, when you say, I think both in terms of subtext, but also how we respond, what kind of wider feeling or reaction is generated in us and how we deal with it emotionally. Not sure if I'm making sense. No, I think you make perfect sense. This is really, that's really a great point. And I think I agree with you. No, I think I do agree with you. It's more about impressions more than anything else. It's like an impressionist painting in a certain way, right? Or not impressionist painting, but not. I don't mean that, but let me take that back. This is a film that is about your impressions when you watch it. This is a film about impressions. It's not about answers. It's about impressions. And so I think the fact that it's a film that's not about answers, I think, is a potential fault in the film because, right, when we watch films, we want answers. I want answers. And so I'm going to be honest, I share a lot in the frustration when I watch this film. Every time, I always am frustrated by this film because it doesn't provide answers as to what happens to the girls. But I always try to remind myself that it's not about that, it's about the impressions. And so even now, I have a kind of struggle in my head trying to keep that clear. And the struggle manifests itself by certain theories that I have formulated about what happens to the girls. You know, I have a particular theory about Miss Greta McCraw, and I find her to be a very peculiar character in the context of this film. The fact that she is very set off from the rest of the pack. She talks about the formation of Hanging Rock with great detail, and there's and yet there's a quirky aspect to her speech about Hanging Rock and its formations, and over millions of years. There's the word. Do you know the word mammalian? Mammalian, which I think is the word that means like a volcanic eruption that turns into a rock formation. I think the word is mammalian, M-A-M-E-L-O-N. I'm not a scientist, but I think that's what the word is supposed to be, mammalian. And if you look at the film, the beginning when they're on the ride towards towards Hanging Rock, she has her speech about the formation of Hanging Rock. And she's talking about the mammalians, but and the subtitles, if you turn on the subtitles, has the word mammalian, M-A-M-E-L-O-N. But I always hear her say the word mammatan. Mammatan. She doesn't say mammalian, she says mammatan. Now, I don't know, is that a different way of pronouncing the word? If so, let me know. But I don't think that mammatan is an accepted way to pronounce the word mammalian. But please correct me if I'm wrong. But that's an example of how quirky I think Greta McCraw as a character is, right? I mean, according to Mrs. Appleyard, she was a person of masculine intellect, whatever that means. That's a weird comment anyway, but whatever that means. But Greta McCraw. And also, the way, remember the scene where Mademoiselle, after she says goodbye to the girls and they walk off and you never see them again, Mademoiselle says, "Oh, now I know." And Miss McCraw is reading her book, and suddenly she almost like violently closes her book and just looks up at Mademoiselle and says, "What do you know?" And then Mademoiselle says, Miranda is like a Botticelli angel. And I always found that moment to be so weird. Like, why would Miss McCraw respond so sharply to a seemingly innocent comment? "Oh, now I know." Right? Why would, and then "What do you know?" It's almost like, I always read that moment to be like Miss McCraw is almost hiding something, and she feels like she almost was found out. And so I always felt that Miss McCraw was, how should I don't want to say too much, but I've always felt that Miss McCraw maybe she knew a little bit more than she let on. But that's my own little theory in my head about what happened at Hanging Rock. And in fact, I think for those of you who are interested, and I don't want to focus on it too much, but of course you can always find, anyway, you can always look up Joan Lindsay and the book and The Secret of Hanging Rock, if you're interested. Again, I think the issue about what actually happened to the girls, it's one of those weird things, because the more I think about it, the more I realize that it's not really important, if you know what I mean. Of course, it's important in the context of human life and what happened and the drama, the immediate drama, but from a broader context, from a broader point of view, it really doesn't, it's not as significant as many of the other themes that I think we've been talking about today. But Greta McCraw, I think she knew a little bit more than she might have let on. But that's just my own little personal theory. But anyway, sorry about that. Let me just keep going here. And it's 7:50, so I've been talking for about an hour and 50 minutes. So we're going to have to wind it down a little bit, but I can address the comments for a little bit more. Great. Wonderful. Wonderful. Wonderful stuff. Okay. So this is a really great conversation, by the way. Really well done. Well done. Oh, Laobing J. Yes, hello. Hello. And Giovanni Bolivar, hello. Um, and oh yes, Giovanni Bolivar asks a great question. So, Daisuke, rarely do director's cuts remove scenes from a film. It's usually the other way around. Having seen both cuts, do you feel the shorter director's cut is the superior viewing experience? Giovanni, thank you very much for the question. That's very good. I haven't spoken about I didn't talk about the original cut because I focused on the director's cut because I thought that that was probably the one that was more available. I'm not sure how available the original cut is. The original cut is longer. It's let's see here. Gosh, I don't. Sorry, but I should have had the running. I don't have the running time. Let's see. No, I don't have the running time. Maybe if someone has the running time on the original cut, you could help me out. But it is not significantly longer, but there are chunks of subplot that are cut out. I think significantly there is a subplot involving Michael and Irma that is removed almost entirely from the director's cut, or from the cut to form the director's cut. And there are also some shots that we see of the girls in the town. I think there's some scenes involving the girls in church, singing in church, that we don't get in the director's cut. We only get a shot in the director's cut of them walking out of a church, I think, and we see the townsfolk looking at them with some suspicious eyes. And that leads to the downfall of the reputation of the Appleyard College, and so there are those aspects to it. But yeah, it's in particular, I would have loved to have seen the subplot between Michael and Irma. I think that adds an element of Michael's obsession, and also adds an element of romance to the film in a certain way that we don't get in the director's cut necessarily. The director's cut has a finer approach, which is more superior. It's really hard to say. I do, however, have a preference for the original version, because for whatever reason, I think this is the version. I want to say, I don't recall when the first time I saw this, but I recall when I think it was this original version that I had seen first. And so at least I feel like I know the film better as the original version than the director's cut version, although I do watch the director's cut version more now because of the Criterion release. But yeah, I think if you can find the original version, the original cut, I would recommend that you watch that. But the director's cut, you're not losing anything of significance, of great significance, let me put it that way. But I think both versions are recommended, which is why I go back to the second sight release over Criterion. Again, I'm so sorry, Criterion. I love Criterion. I love you so much. You know this, but this second sight release is much better. And I'm told by some friends that the Blu-ray release is also includes all the stuff that's on the DVD release. Just be sure, just make sure that that's the case. But if so, wonderful. I do know that the DVD 3-disc release has all the stuff here, which is really great. You know, there is. I understand that it wasn't a planned. It wasn't an ending that was actually integrated into the film that was later cut out, but it was an ending that I think was planned and conceptualized, but ended up not being integrated into any final cut. And it's an ending that involves Mrs. Appleyard, and Mrs. Appleyard going to Hanging Rock, right? Because we know at the end of the film, Mrs. Appleyard was found dead at Hanging Rock, apparently having thrown herself off in an act of suicide. I mean, that's the voiceover, right? But the documentary footage in this release actually shows some footage that I think was shot of Rachel Roberts as Mrs. Appleyard actually walking around the Hanging Rock area, and there's no sound, so I think there's just music that's laid over for the purposes of the documentary. I think it's Bruce Smeaton's Ascent, but that is a fascinating bit of footage. Again, it's not the original ending. Please don't get me wrong. There is no. I think the endings are pretty intact. Intact. Oh gosh, the endings are as they were in both the original version and the director's cut version. But just check out the documentary about. Some people refer to it online as the lost ending, and I don't think it's. My understanding is that the ending, the stuff involving Mrs. Appleyard that was conceived but was eventually never integrated into the film. That's not an ending per se. That was a concept that ended up not being integrated. So that's my understanding of the situation. In any event, it's a very interesting background about an aspect of filmmaking of this film that I think is really worth checking out if you're interested in more details about this film. I'm sure you can find. Maybe you can find some clips of the documentary online. I don't know. Maybe you can do a search of it. Maybe there are clips of it on YouTube. I don't know. I mean, maybe you can do that. But what I do know is that you can definitely find it on the second sight release. I know some people said that the documentary is also on the Blu-ray. I'm not sure because I don't have the Blu-ray. So just be absolutely sure that the Blu-ray has all the special features. And the original version. Just do some double checking before you click the buy button. Or ask people in the chat, and maybe they'll know. But if you're interested in this film, read the book, and then watch the second sight release. And if you were really interested in knowing a little bit more information about what Joan Lindsay might have been thinking about in terms of the ending, I mean, again, I feel bad kind of suggesting it, but I have to because it's out there in the public. Look up Secret of Hanging Rock. And I wouldn't actually recommend reading Secret of Hanging Rock, to be perfectly honest, because I wouldn't recommend reading Secret of Hanging Rock. But if you really want to know as much as you can about Picnic at Hanging Rock, I think Secret of Hanging Rock is essential. But that is, let me just leave it at that. It's essential. I think it's essential, but I really don't recommend it, if that makes any sense. But in any event, what I would recommend is these two things, the book and the second sight release. So there's that. And let me now just begin to wind down. So if you have any last minute comments, please let me know. Yes. Gosh. Sean Gallagher says, as corny as this sounds, I love these discussions with everyone. We've become a film family over the past few weeks. Oh, that's really nice of you to say. Sean, I really appreciate it because, I'm really so grateful for Sean and all of you asking these questions. Isaac, Giovanni, Solitaire Road and Wolfgratz, Matt, and I can't mention everyone. Nip Tuck 117, Raven Q222, and Emily and Bailey and SJS Films and Oh, genealogy mad, great, well done. Oh yes, I'm so, and Elliot. Oh gosh, you all and everyone here. It's just been so wonderful. So thank you very much. You know, I love the kind of intimate feelings, intimate atmosphere of this discussion, and so I can't wait to continue it going forward. I think, was it next week? What did I say? Rebecca, Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca. So I look forward to that very much. And let's see. So I can do this for another 5 minutes before I have to go and walk the dog. So it's now 8 a.m. here, or a little after 8 a.m. in Tokyo. So I'll do this for a little bit more, and then we'll we'll call it a day, as it were. So I just wanted to thank you very much again for joining me here, and I hope it was I hope you had a good discussion. It sounds like, or it looks like from the chat, that you had a great discussion here, very much so. And please, you know, this isn't meant to be the end of the discussion. Please feel free to, of course, keep on discussing the film amongst yourselves and amongst your friends here. And again, this is not the end, but it's the beginning. And so I hope that you just continue on. And my son is, oh, come on, come on. And he left the room. So come on, you can come in. So this is, I think, my cue to say it's time for me to go. But thank you very much. And let me just say that my son is here. Do you want to say hello? Come on. You want to say hello? All right. All right. So, all right. You feel okay? Okay. All right. Here, give me 5. Okay. Nice. How are you doing? Okay. Yeah. You want to say hi? Hi. Hi. All right. So, okay, this is my cue to leave, my friends. So, anyway, I hope you're doing well. And again, thank you very much for joining me with Picnic at Hanging Rock. You haven't seen Picnic at Hanging Rock yet, right? No? No?
Yes.
You have? Oh, no. Oh, no, I don't want to show that to you yet. Oh, no. No, no. That should be a film that we should see maybe when you're a little bit older, okay? Okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you, buddy. Thank you, thank you. So, in any event, so what do you want to say? You want to say goodbye to everyone and see you next time. Okay? All right. All right. Give me 5 again. Give me 5. Awesome. Okay. All right, my friends. So see you. Okay, see you, and I hope you're doing well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies. And see you hopefully next week for Rebecca. I look forward. Is it Rebecca? Is it? Am I right? Is it? It's Rebecca, or is it 8.5? Which one I just got? Is it Rebecca or 8.5? I'll check and I'll make an announcement later. So anyway, my friend, thank you so much, and thank you so much again for your support and your enthusiasm for cinema, and your comments and your astute observations. It always makes me very happy, and I've learned so much today. So please have a wonderful rest of your day. Okay, my friends? Cheers. Bye-bye.